Well, for more on the Southport murders, let's get the views of someone that's been working very, very hard on this story for a number of months, and that is writer and commentator turned investigative journalist Charlie Bentley Astor, who has an incredibly authoritative Substack account, which I'd hugely recommend that you go to because all the details of the case are in there. She's been very brave. She's risked her reputation and indeed at times the law to cover this important story. And she joins me now. Charlie, welcome to the Mark Dolan Show.
Thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you. First of all, the Southport triple murder case. What are the headlines?
The headlines are that Axel Cabana has pled guilty after originally having a not guilty plea entered in on his behalf. This was a shock to everyone, it seems, even to the legal teams surrounding the families. There has been an extensive cover-up of the true nature of his identity and his personality and his behaviour and the extent to which he has been engaging in this kind of violence and terrorism.
There's no reason why the authorities could not have said that this was a terror-related incident within 24 hours of the attacks.
Well, technically, they couldn't say that because the definition of a terror attack in this country, unless it is committed on a group of people or an individual with an express political motive, or is conducted with a bomb or a gun, it cannot be declared a terror attack. Because Axel Cabana has not declared a motivation to the police, they cannot declare it a terror attack. But yes, the state should have at least said, it appears to us in the first instance that this is terror motivated. But they didn't. They chose to say that there was no terror link at all, which was a flat out lie.
So is the term cover-up appropriate in relation to how the authorities expressed what was happening within the first day or two of the attacks?
I believe so. You only have to look at the way the media covered the identity of who this person was. Now, originally it's because he was under 18. He turned 18 only 8 days after, I believe, being arrested. And so the laws in this country mean that the identity of a child being suspect in a crime cannot have their identity declared. However, within a few days we found out exactly who he was because the judge decided it was in the public interest for everyone to know because the media had portrayed him as a quiet Welsh choir boy, which to most people in Britain gives the image of, you know, a white working class lad in the hills, you know, very, very unassuming. Which frightened people because we've never seen this kind of attack from a native British child.
Indeed. What's your appraisal of Sir Keir Starmer's handling of this case, and particularly in the aftermath when he made a speech calling out far-right protesters on the streets?
I think his appearance at the memorial the day after sums it up. He was at the memorial for these girls for 19 seconds. He all but threw down the reef, and having spoken to several of the families now who've had daughters injured in this attack, they were disgusted. One of them almost threw up. They could not believe the callousness. You know, his eyes were darting left and right. You know, he barely raised his eyes to look around him. Obviously, he was being heckled by locals who knew the girls, who were terrified for their own children, who were either there or knew the other children who were there could have been their children. And I think from that point, people knew something wasn't quite right. And I think the guilt was there, you know, that he knew exactly who this kid was because the authorities knew who this kid was way before this attack happened.
Do you think Keir Starmer is now in a difficult situation with regard to how he acted straight after the attacks? Do you think he's politically in trouble?
It's difficult to say that he wouldn't be. I think he's trying very hard at the moment to distance himself from the way that the case has been handled, kind of by portraying himself as an outsider, as someone who is of the public and didn't know much more than the public. You know, he came out today and said that, you know, I know the legal process very well. I couldn't have said anything otherwise. I would have jeopardised the case and you'd all be raking me over the coals if this guy got off scot-free. There is no way in hell this guy would have got off scot-free. Even if some of this stuff had come out, the evidence against him was so strong. They have body cam footage of him being arrested on the scene, the attack. There was no way he was getting out of this. So these are just weasel words. Starmer knew who this guy was and chose not simply to not declare the facts, we can almost understand that, but to deliberately counter-signal that which was known to be true, that there was a terror link, terror motivation, terror inspiration to this attack. And he said that there categorically was not.
Will Sir Keir Starmer regret labelling protesters at the time as far right?
Not in his own personal moral sense, I don't believe so. I believe he'll probably go to the grave thinking that he was perfectly entitled and perfectly right to decry these protesters as far right. But I think he will politically. This will expedite his departure from office. I do not believe he will make it to the next election. But simply because people, when they get the details of this case, they will not be able to tolerate seeing the faces of our politicians on the TV screen every day. They will have to go.
So you think this Southport story will ultimately bring Sir Keir Starmer down as Prime Minister?
And Yvette Cooper, I think anyone who was at that Cobra meeting the first couple of days into the riots would have been informed of everything that went on. You know, we saw the chief of the Metropolitan Police come out of that Cobra meeting and snatch that microphone off of that journalist and practically throw it on the ground. There was a reason he was angry, and it's because I'm sure he was being asked to do things he was deeply uncomfortable with. But I think, you know, chief of police up in Merseyside is going to have to be looked at, you know, because she was sort of complicit in the narrative that was moving forward. If you examine her speech very carefully, you can see she said, with regards to the terror manual, which everyone said, oh, but you can download it off of online, you know. No, you can't. She said a useful version. It is illegal to own such a copy in this country. So the hints were always there, but it was been cloaked in very sophisticated language.
Just to clarify, can you express the clear reasons, the clear evidence in your view as to why this was a cover-up by the authorities, why the public were lied to, rather than just information being concealed, which of course are two different things?
For me, it is the counter-signalling of the truth. It was he's a Welsh choir boy, very quiet. We're seeing reports off the neighbours today, you know, suddenly it was, oh, he was very quiet and unassuming, and now it's, he would glare at you, he was terrifying, he was clearly disturbed. You know, these reports didn't come out, and I don't think that would have damaged the case because he was never going to get off. And, you know, the Home Secretary, Keir Starmer, said these were not terror-related, inspired incidents, and they very clearly were.
Now, would you put that down as a lie by Sir Keir Starmer or misinformation? Or can we be kind to him legally and just say that that's a reasonable interpretation, that this was not a terror-inspired attack?
He said himself this morning that he himself would declare it a terror attack. Would that be the legal definition of a terror attack? He can't because it isn't, but he's talked about changing the definition of a terror attack to accommodate such styles in the future. I think he very clearly knew who this person was, and he could have said, you know, we can't discuss it at the moment. We know that he has as extensive material in his house relating to terror incidents, but because this is the definition, we cannot declare it as such. That would have put a lot of people's minds at ease, but they didn't. They instead said it the direct opposite.
And in the aftermath of this awful triple murder, the police were very parsimonious with information for the public. And I actually spoke to a former retired cop myself on my old TV show, a former detective, who said that actually the police should have been far more open with the public, because the fact that they weren't led to more trouble, more misinformation, and the terrible idea of burning down a local mosque.
Exactly. So what we now know, it's been covered slightly in the press, but I've heard more from the families who have seen photographs of his bedroom, for example. He was inspired by many different kinds of radicalism, and if they'd brought that up, if they said yes, there are some Islamic inspired materials in his house, but there's also the mass shootings in schools in America. There was a handful of Nazi inspired extremism materials in his house. If they had come forward and said these things, it would have deflected from this, and also being transparent about how his parents got into the country. You know, were they refugees, or, as it's now transpiring, did his father have a role in this in the genocide, and has that been an impact upon the family? All these extra details surrounding the case, rather than actually addressing Ruda Cabana himself, but the family and the his schooling and stuff like that, all could have definitely have been talked about.
Charlie, if there was a cover-up by the authorities, by the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary, or if we were lied to, what would have motivated that?
I think the same as has motivated the cover-up of the grooming gangs for several decades now. The facts of this case are rather politically inconvenient. The perpetrator, the accused, and now the going to be convicted murderer, is the child of immigrants. There is clearly severe issues with integration. He did not integrate, and from reports of the neighbours, the family struggled to integrate as well. They have a traumatic history. What were the circumstances in which they were allowed to come into the country? And if there is this background in the genocide, why were they not monitored if they were deemed safe to be in this country in the first place? There's lots of questions that just aren't being answered in this. Why, for example, why did they move? I have some intel on that I'm beginning to be able to flesh out with actual documentation. He was known to prevent, since he was 13 years old. That's not normal.
No, it isn't normal. Look, I know you're busy. We're going to wrap things up, but just before you go, a couple of quick ones. First of all, we can both condemn the violence that we saw in the aftermath of the triple murder. People were angry. That doesn't justify breaking the law. But do those who protested but didn't break the law have a right to feel aggrieved now about being labelled far right by the leader of the nation, the Prime Minister?
Absolutely. It was not the time or the place. As we've saw today, he's very much tried to pivot away from repeating those words while still sort of saying the same thing in vain. I think he knows that it was a step too far, and even if he wanted to perhaps later on declare it as such, we haven't seen substantial evidence that this was as they said. That was another thing that led people to think there was something suspicious about this, that the EDL would come back out of nowhere. We've not seen substantial evidence corroborating that, that massive hordes of people are being bussed into these towns and into Southport. If you look at the arrest records and prosecution records for the violence, there are some people that have come from Manchester and bigger towns surrounding Southport, but actually quite a lot of people were in Southport. So I think it was a very sort of hazy portrayal of what had actually happened.
Do you have any hope that lessons will be learned and that this sort of issue will be dealt with in a more open way in the future?
I think the intensity of the reaction has certainly given the establishment pause for what they should do. I think they should be changing the definition of a terror attack in law. I think we should revise what our contempt of court rules are, because actually they're extremely vague, and that means that people won't go anywhere near the line in fear that they might cross it. because they're not quite sure where the line is. But unfortunately, Keir Starmer said today, a line has been drawn in the sand, a line has been drawn in the sand, but a line in the sand can easily be kicked away again, as has done with the grooming gangs. And so, this line, in fact, has been drawn in the blood of those children. And if it's not honoured, it will be because our political establishment has scrubbed that line out.
And you've become an incredibly important journalist in this country. Your Substack is Charlie Bentley Astor, and you've been covering the story at length, and you felt the need to because the media have been silent.
That's my secondary reason for doing it. I understand their silence. I'm frustrated with it. I've looked deep into the contempt of court laws, obviously in covering this, so that I did not cross the line at any stage. But some of them did not go anywhere near it. This stuff about Ruda Cabana's father had nothing directly to do with what would have come up in the trial. They could have published it. They did not. So yes, their silence is one of the things that intensely frustrated me. But the reason I did it is because I do condemn the violence, obviously. You should not be trying to murder people in asylum hotels, even if obliquely you feel it is justified because the government have not got control of our mass immigration, and we have seen increasing violence from these people who have turned up with no background. But what struck me most is that those people, working class people, these are working class communities that are bearing the brunt of this, they were villainised, having been ignored time and time and time and time again. If you take every means possible, voting, petitions, peaceful protest, and you are not heard year after year after year after year, you cannot be surprised that some people are pushed too far and throw bricks and things like this. I don't like it, but unfortunately it's simply the way that human beings are. And I don't like the fact that my kin, essentially, in working class northerners were pushed to this level because they were being ignored by the establishment.
Now, Charlie Bentley Astor has no resources with which to conduct her journalism. She's done it out of her own pocket on her own time. So the way that you can help in the Mark Dolan Show community is to give Astor a follow on X, Astor_Charlie. But most importantly, go to her Substack where there is genuine free speech, and you'll find a capacious volume of material on this subject in Charlie's Substack, and it is Charlie Bentley Astor on Substack. Do check that out. Charlie, we'll catch up soon. Thanks for your courage.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for watching. Now, to see the Mark Dolan Show completely ad-free, a longer version of the programme, plus extra bonus content and live videos, and your chance to message me, then head to my Substack at markdolan.com.